Before we begin, I'm covering this series about the last year of Charles the Bold, 1476, in random order. Once the series is finished, I will probably number the videos in a chronological order. Anyway, let's start. It's always tricky to describe the history of a place you don't know very well. We arrived in Salins rather unprepared, so we may have missed a few interesting landmarks. Salins-les-Bains is a small town in the Jura department of the Bourgogne-Franche-Comté. It's not very far from the French-Swiss border. In the past, the town was simply called Salins. Its main activity was salt extraction. Thanks to this, Salins was the second biggest town in the Franche-Comté in the Middle Ages, after Besançon. It was a fortified town with more than 25 towers. Nowadays, about 13 of those towers or parts of those towers can still be encountered, sometimes well hidden. The Les Bains part was only added to the town's name in 1926, when Salins had also become a spa town. I suggest that we first explore the town and its surroundings and try to discover some remnants from the time of Philip the Good and Charles the Bold. In the later part too, I'm going to tell the story of Charles the Bold's stay in Salins. Entering Salins is quite spectacular. The town lies in a narrow valley crossed by the Furieuse River, a small river that runs along the western side of the town. On both sides, high on the peaks, two forts, Fort Saint-André and Fort Belin, guard the area. In the center of the town we find the Grand Salines, or saltworks of Salins, one of the town's main attractions. The saltworks closed in 1962 and the site is now a museum. During a guided tour, you learn how salt extraction was carried out here throughout the ages. The Dukes of Burgundy, the owners of Salins, derived considerable income from the valuable salt. The salty water, or brine, was pumped up from underground. In the Middle Ages, this was done using a noria or scoop wheel with the help of horses. From 1750 onwards, the water was pumped up using hydraulic power. The brine was channeled into large basins that were heated to evaporate the salt. The salt was then scraped from the basins with large shovels and stored. As you can imagine, this was extremely hard work. At first, the salt was stored in open warehouses. Later, these were covered. Both men and women worked in the saltworks, performing a wide variety of tasks. A large number of the women specialized in making salt cakes. During the tour you can also walk through the underground gallery, which ends with a large old wheel that was not in operation during our visit because it needs restoration. Once back above ground, we take a short walk through the town. Since the 10th century, Salins has been divided into two parts, Bourg-Dessus or Bourg-le-Sire in the south and Bourg-Dessous or Bourg-le-Comte in the north, with a kind of intermediate section in between. The two boroughs each had their own saltworks, a large one and a smaller one. In 1497, the two parts of the town were definitely reunited. It's a rainy day and there's a mist hanging over the scenery. Because the town lies in a valley, the center is long and narrow, a main street with only a few side streets. You can't miss the saltworks with its tall tower. There should be a second tower here as well, but I can't remember it and I don't see it in my pictures. Behind the open space under which the underground galleries of the saltworks lie stands a rather strange low building. At first glance it looks like a bicycle shelter, but it's actually the casino. From here you have a good view of Fort Belin. Just past the saltworks we see the 15th century floor tower. Another one of the many towers the town once had. In the background we see a colorful dome tower. It belongs to the 17th century chapel of Notre-Dame Libératrice. After that we arrive at a small square with a town hall which, following French custom, is quite large compared to the size of the town. To be honest, I didn't take many pictures of this part of Salins. A bit further along the narrow street, a bit hidden behind a corner, we find the Fontaine d'Arion from 1577. The sign is somewhat misleading because the Fontaine d'Arion is not actually this basin. All that remains of the original fountain is a weathered sculptural fragment of the Greek poet Arion, which has been incorporated into a new fountain a few meters further on. The fountain once adorned the central square of the lower town. The great halls built for Philip the Good around 1450 once stood at roughly this location. They were demolished in the 18th century. A little further on we encounter a Templar house. It didn't look particularly remarkable from the outside, so no surprise here, I didn't take a picture. Still a bit further on we come across the medieval church of Saint-Maurice. It was closed that day and I can't say much about it. A few meters further on the right stands the 14th century Andelot Tower. This marks the northern limit of the Bourg de Sceaux. We walk around it and return via a narrow road that runs along the old city walls. Here and there you can still see remnants of walls and towers. Not much further on we see a square medieval tower on the right in need of restoration. According to the sign, it dates from the 11th or 12th century and was rebuilt in the 15th century. This is the Chambonneau Tower, a remnant of the Chambonneau Gate and the fortified house that defended it. Next we walk past a closed church a bit further down. It has been turned into a theatre. Then on some old stairs a grumpy cat stares us down. We arrive at a small square where a massive building stands, the Voltaire School. Behind it we can see the Tour Dorée or Golden Tower. Above the rooftops we can see the tower of the medieval church of Saint-Anatoine peeking out. We walked past it but assumed it would be closed like all the previous churches we saw on our way. So unfortunately no pictures of the interior, even though it's said to be very atmospheric. There is however an interesting fact about the church. Around the year 1500 the canons of the church wanted to have some tapestries made to decorate the interior. They were to depict scenes from the life of Saint Anatoine. For this purpose, Canon Anel and Jean Jouffroy travelled to Bruges in Flanders in 1502. They commissioned the tapestries from Catherine Hasselet, a tapestry maker. The two clergymen paid an advance to Hippolyte de Berthaud, who lived in Bruges. We know this Hippolyte. He was a financial officer of Charles the Bold and later of Mary of Burgundy. He is depicted in a painting by Dirk Bouts. The production of the tapestries took several years and required multiple trips to Bruges. Sponsors of the tapestries include the Bishop of Chalon and members of the Salt Works. Of the 14 tapestries, unfortunately, only 3 have survived, and they are now kept in the Louvre Museum. They are interesting because one of them depicts the Noria of Salines. How accurate that depiction is, I do not know. Another tapestry shows French King Louis XI, who is portrayed as liberating the town of Dole. This is entirely fictional, as Louis was not present during that time. He had sent Georges La Trémoille instead. To reach Fort Belin, we have to leave the town and head uphill. In the Middle Ages, a castle stood here, Castel Belin or Château Belin, but by the 17th century it was already in ruins. On a 17th century engraving you can still see traces of it. A bit of trivia: before he became Duke of Burgundy, Charles the Bold was Count of Charolais and Lord of Châteaubelin. From 1674 onward, Vauban had a fort built here, which was destroyed by the Austrians in 1814. A new fort was constructed in 1828. It looks very interesting, but it's a private property and cannot be visited. The fort is undergoing restoration works and the site is quite dangerous. There is, however, a parking area nearby where you can park the car and walk a bit further to a viewpoint, from which we have a beautiful view of parts of the fort, of Salins and of Fort Saint-André on the opposite side of the valley. Fort Saint-André lies on the other side as mentioned. On the site of the present Fort Saint-André, there was already a defensive tower in the 13th century. It was built for Jean de Chalon, known as the Antique, to protect the saltworks. The structure gradually declined during several wars and was occasionally restored. In 1674, Vauban built a fort here for Louis XIV. Further destructions and restorations followed in the centuries after. In 1896, the fort was decommissioned. Today, it's privately owned and used as a tourist site and for events. When we were there, it was closed for a wedding. Now, this is all for today. In the second part, we will have a look at a few places that played a role in Charles the Bold's visit in 1476.